The Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by italki. Become fluent in any language.
Hello everyone and welcome. Sorry for the technical delay. The Wi-Fi wasn't working, so I had to go and procure some internet before I could move on. So, is everyone hearing me all right? All right in the back? Super. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. And today we're going to be talking about the Polyglot secret, among other things. But we're also going to talk about the Actual Fluency podcast, which is, of course, a podcast that I run most weeks. And I was happy to see that other people have heard of it as well in the Polyglot feud yesterday. So thank you for those who answered Actual Fluency. That was pretty cool. So my presentation today is going to be about the Polyglot journey, and I'm going to talk about what exactly that means and what that entails. And then I'm going to talk about the reflections on language learning that I have sort of made during these interviews. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how many interviews I've made, because it's quite a lot, so we'll see. Alright, so what is the Polyglot journey? Well, it's different for all of us. Many people in this room are sort of polyglots forever. We've started with one language, we learned it in school, we learned it randomly, like I learned English completely by accident, as many people do in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and other countries. And then I started learning German and came on to other languages as well. But there are also people who just learn one language, two languages, three languages. And for me, it's not about the amount of languages you learn. It's kind of the mindset or the philosophy behind the polyglot idea, that you're open to new languages and cultures, and you want to talk to new people, you want to meet new people. You don't just want to stay in your house all your life and I don't know what to do, but still. So we're all different. We come in many different shapes and sizes, and there are a lot of people in this room, I'm sure, who want to learn all. What's that?
I'm sorry, it looks a bit unsharp here.
Okay, I don't know if I can do anything about that. Thank you. Is that better? Is that readable? Okay, perfect. And because we all come in such different shapes and sizes, for me it's fascinating to study or hear all the different stories that people have. I'm sure many people in this room, like I was saying, are interested in learning all the languages in the world, and if you had an unlimited amount of time, I'm sure you would get there someday. But for some it's just a region, or maybe they move to a new country or area. Maybe if you move to Hungary like I did, you want to learn Hungarian and maybe some of the surrounding languages, or you just want to go crazy like a lot of people in this room, in a good way. So we are all at different places along the way, which is sometimes forgotten at these events, because there are lots of people in this room, I know who you are, who are at very high levels and know many languages, but there are also people who come to these events as they're just at the start of their journey, their polyglot journey. And as I'll tell in a while, my journey started only 2 years ago. So I'm at a very beginning stage, and some here might have been doing it for 30 years, maybe 50 years even. And that's why it's such a good idea to bring up all these different perspectives. And for some of you that will mean that there will be some repetition in this, or you might say, well, that was obvious. But there might be some people watching this on YouTube in a month from now saying, that's interesting. So I try to cover as many topics from these interviews as I can. All right, just a little quick summary about me, because the podcast is, of course, mostly about the guests, the interview guests, but it's also a reflection about me, what is my journey. And if you listen to some of the earlier episodes, the questions that I'm asking today are much different, because I'm further along the journey. So I was really interested in languages early on. I spoke English almost I can't remember not speaking English. And I was born in Denmark, so that's a little bit weird, but nonetheless very interesting. And when we had German, I was one of the only students in class who actually enjoyed it. Most people were just at the football pitch or, thinking about the next recess. But I actually enjoyed it. And then as I got into the middle of primary school, I was really tired of school, and that was all of school. So I was more interested in Pokemon cards or video games, Counter-Strike, if anyone remember that from back in the day. So I sort of gave up on all school, which is kind of a shame when I look back, because this is kind of 15 years ago or something like that. So And then I unfortunately ran into a number of personal tragedies, which I shall not bore you with today, but that kind of caused me into this depression, despair, hopelessness loop. And that meant that I just didn't know, I couldn't do anything, let alone learn languages. And then I found the polyglotism or the polyglot movement or the community, I don't know what to call it, I think we should have a vote one day so we can name it. But I discovered it I found Fluent in 3 months actually, Ben Lewis's blog. And I was just incredible at the idea that people would just do this. Today of course it's ridiculous to even think this, but just learn languages or just what? For what? And I was just so absorbed by the idea, and I thought, wow, I could really do this. And I sort of thought back to my early days in school, and I said, man, this would be interesting. This is going to be my future, and I'm going to learn Russian in 3 months, and yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. And so I thought, okay, so this is kind of an interesting take on it, because the blogs and videos I could find on YouTube were all very prolific learners, like Richard Simcott and Alex Rawlings, and these were people who had been in the game for a long time. And I thought, okay, what about a big beginner's perspective? And that's why I started Actual Fluency as the name. And that's why I came up with a podcast as well, because I had a lot of questions and I was very curious, and I thought there was a secret to the polyglots, as it were. And I'll get back to the secret in a minute, or I'll save it for the end probably. But then, since then, I've done 90 episodes, and it's been mostly weekly. I've taken some months off, taken some breaks once in a while, and there have been technical problems and so on and so forth. But I've actually published over 90 interviews or episodes. There are some solo episodes as well where I talk about my own story in greater detail, if you guys are interested. But mostly interviews with language learners. And my future or my current status is that I'm living in Budapest, Hungary, and I'm learning Hungarian. I don't know if anyone else tried learning it, but it's one of the harder ones. Okay, we got one. Okay, that's good. 2. And the rest, you have something to look forward to. And I'm also learning Russian, but that's, like I said, we'll get back to that in a minute. And my goal is to have almost 6 languages, also counting Esperanto, to a good level. So that's kind of where I am today.
Bonege.
Bonege. And just a quick overview of the podcast. I was really quitting everything. It was football. I mean, even, and maybe this is slightly embarrassing, but whatever. Pokemon cards were really big back in the day. I don't know if you understand how big it was. So I went to a Pokemon club, and we would trade cards, and we would play the games, and we would talk about the best Pokemon. And did you see the episode last night? And then actually I quit that. So if I can quit that, I'm gonna really struggle learning Russian. But anyway, so I thought, okay, I need some external motivation, as Brian Kwong often talks about. And the podcast to me, or at least the website, could be doing this to me, because if I had to do something every week, I knew that I had to do some learning every week to talk about that. So for me, that was kind of a motivational thing. And I'll get into a little bit more about that later. But I guess probably the biggest thing, and it was the curiosity, because I thought, how can anyone learn 10 languages, let alone 20? How can you learn all these languages? It's impossible. Even Denmark is quite famous for their bilingualism, but nobody learned more than 1, maybe 1.5. Like, some people knew some German, but they didn't speak it. So it's like, there must be a secret here somewhere. I mean, they must be drinking some, the water must be different in these countries or something. And I set out a mission that if I could interview these people and ask them, well, surely I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And we'll get back to the secret at the end, but this was kind of the start. It was, for me, I was like, please tell me, how do I learn languages? How do I do it? And that was basically what started the whole thing. And curiosity is also something we'll get into in a minute, because that's also very important. And then as a kind of an afterthought, I thought, well, somebody else might be interested in the findings, so I'll just kind of put it out there. That's how the podcast went out. And today I really like the TED slogan, Ideas Worth Sharing. And I think that really applies to the podcast today. And that's the point of listening, in my opinion, simply to share the ideas. And it doesn't matter if it's about how to learn German prefixes, or how to learn Esperanto, or why Duolingo is amazing or terrible depending on who you are. And it doesn't matter, it's just sharing of ideas, kind of like why we go to these events in the first place. We talk to each other, we share ideas, we share tricks and resources, and that was why I started the podcast, to kind of get these one-on-one, very personal interviews and experiences and stories, because origin stories are some of the most interesting I've ever had on the podcast. Like, why did you get into languages? It's quite unusual, if you think about it, to just want to learn languages for the sake of it. So for me, how to get into it was always interesting. All right, and I think I covered this pretty much, and this is just what it is today. And going on 90 plus episodes, and I try to put one out every week. Like last Sunday I had one out with Shannon Kennedy, somebody might know her from Eurolinguista. And actually tonight there'll be an episode as well from a guy living in Japan. So it keeps going, and I'd love to have some of you guys on as well. And here are just some of the guests that I've had on. You might know some of them. And like I said, if you want to come on, that would be fantastic.
Du kan gøre en med mig. Med mig kan du gøre en. Det er okay.
Yeah.
Du kan snakke med mig, og snakker derovre senere.
We'll talk after the talk, for sure. So I thought a long time, what could I actually contribute for all these podcasts? What can I draw from them? And the best word I came up with was reflections, because that's really what it is. At the end of the day, these are kind of my thoughts, and you might disagree with many of them. They're very anecdotal, and basically these are just the basic ideas I've had from interviewing over 100 people, 100 very accomplished polyglots. So I hope you enjoy some of them, and some of them are going to be very quick because they're very obvious, and some of them I might take a few minutes to talk about, but I have quite a few of them, so I want to get through them as well. Okay, so the polyglot secret. We'll get to that later. And the reason I'm doing this also, these some of you will think these things are quite basic, but like I said before, we're all at different stages. You don't know who's going to watch this. I don't know all of you, so I don't know if there's some of you here who are starting to learn their first foreign language. So some of these tips and tricks you might find really interesting. And some of you who are on their 37th language, you might say, reinforcing the fundamentals isn't terrible. Okay, so the first real lesson I learned with language learning, and this is actually pertinent to everything in life, and that is, impossible is nothing, truly. Like, if you want something and you believe that you can do it, it's not impossible. Like Hungarian, Russian, losing weight, whatever you want to achieve, as long as you believe it's possible, you can do it. But if you believe that it isn't possible, then you will never do it. And if you've ever talked to someone outside the community about language learning, they might have the idea in their head that it's impossible to learn a language once you get older than 8, 10, maybe. And so that thought itself is stopping them from actually doing something they would like to do, because they think, well, it's impossible, so why would I waste time on it? And it's a very powerful thing, our brains, and it's exceptionally good at sabotaging our efforts, first and foremost. I'm sure you all tried something like this. And attached to this is that the cool thing about language learning is also it's not possible to fail, because if you just keep on learning, you can't fail. I mean, that's just how it is. So for me, that's with Hungarian especially, the idea that if I just keep learning, I will learn at some point, maybe in 2054. That's really a good motivational factor. So déjà vu, depending on how you want to say it, is very valuable, the idea of repetition. And I use that on the podcast a lot. People ask me, how can you talk about the same topics every week with so many different people? Because of course there are going to be many similar answers, many similar sentiments about language learning. After all, I mean, we have similar ideas a lot of the way, but the thing is, you can hear something really valuable to your life, and this again goes beyond language learning. You can hear something really valuable at the wrong time, so your brain won't process it. But if you hear it again, chances are you're going to be at a different time in your life or space or whatever, and the information is going to sink in better. And for me, there are lots of these lessons that I'm talking about now that I heard many, many times, but I never really took notice of them because I heard them at the wrong time. So hearing it over and over, getting it repeated, is really valuable. And this is a kind of a controversial topic, but I don't personally believe in talent. I think the idea that somebody is more talented than others, learning, let's say, quicker or faster, more efficiently, definitely, that's possible. But what does that do to my learning? You know, if I say that Daniel Krasa is a better language learner than I am, it has nothing to do with my language learning, so it doesn't matter. Like some people say, oh, you need to have talent to do this, you need to do this. But actually, at the end of the day, I found that the most talented polyglots are the hardest working ones. It usually follows that way. And of course, the note is that if you're talented and working hard, well, then you're just a beast. So, and I think we have some in the room right now, so that's always good. Excuses are the building blocks to nothing. It's one of my favorite sayings. And if you've ever, again, talked to someone who isn't really in the mindset and in the community, you will hear endless amounts of excuses why they're not learning a language. They'll say things like, oh, I'd really like to learn French. And you ask them, well, why don't you just do it? They're like, well, and then they list off, 20 different reasons, mostly starting with I don't have time, or I'm too old, or yeah, I don't live in France. Like, there's so many excuses. The why is really important, and this was something I glossed over in the beginning, but if you can see the point of why you're learning a language, you will learn much better. That's just basic motivation. But if you just kind of say, oh, I want to learn Russian, full stop, then you don't really have anything to work towards. You're just kind of, and there's also a great saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something called Parkinson's law, where the task will kind of increase to the time limit that you allow it. So if you say, I'm going to learn Russian without saying a time limit, then you'll always be learning Russian. And for me, that's true right now, but hopefully I can change it a little later. And in connection with that, what gets measured gets done. So if you don't have any sort of numbers in your language learning, if you're just saying, oh, I'm learning French 5 minutes today, I'm learning French 5 minutes tomorrow, you can easily say, okay, I did my 5 minutes, and then you can sum it at the end. I know, for instance, Judith from one of the organizers here had I don't know if it's still working, but she had a Twitter bot at some point where you could write your numbers and it would add them up at the end. And Judith also loves to have like the sums at the end. And for instance, David James Gold's method, you constantly counting the amount of vocabulary that you're doing, so you keep on track, you keep motivation up. Or if you have flashcards or a textbook that has units like Asimil, you can keep measuring. But if you don't keep track of what you're doing, it sometimes feels like we're doing nothing, or you get nothing done. And so you just kind of get stuck, and the motivation is just really terrible. Keep it simple is also a good idea, because in these very technical days, the ways we can produce methods or apps or softwares or spreadsheets, I mean, we can make learning really difficult and advanced, and we can go through all tons of hoops. But at the end of the day, learning a language, as most of you probably know, is simply just an effort, a consistent effort. It's not about designing that new fantastic app. I love apps, by the way. I'm not dissing the apps, but sometimes going a little simpler and not worrying about all these things is way better. And also the whole discussion of whether learning a language is easy or not. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but my opinion is that it's simple, but it's not easy. Like, as with anything that's worth doing in life, it's hard. It's a lot of hard work, but the idea of opening up a book and learning some vocabulary, the process itself is easy, it's simple, but doing it is the hard part. Always leads to Rome. I was tempted to write Romani here, but I'm not sure how that would have gone down. But the point is, there's not one way to do it, and I'm kind of getting on with the secret a little bit now, is that you can find tons of different ways to learning a language. And if you ask, in fact, if we did a survey here, what's your primary way of learning a language? We might get 100 different answers. So don't be afraid to try new things. Déjà vu? Repetition is quite valuable in language learning. The next point is linked together with my story about learning French, or the first excuse before. Well, I need to be in France to learn French, of course, or other French-speaking countries. But in fact, as somebody who recently moved to the country of the language they're learning, it's not really, I see it as two different things. It can be helpful and it can be detrimental. Because when you're at home, you have you're very comfortable, you have your social circle, you have your house, you have your daily routines. It's very easy to make language learning a part of that. But when you're moving to a new country, you have to sort out paperwork, you have to make new friends, you have to find a new apartment, you have to deal with Hungarian bureaucracy, or, if somebody has tried that, it's really quite difficult. They don't have much English on their official websites. So I would argue that it's not, you definitely don't need it, as many of you probably know, but it can be helpful if you can do it in the right way. But I would actually say it's probably easier to learn in your home country, at least some, and then when you have a functional level, go to the country to improve the language instead. But again, experiences may vary. Stay focused is also a really good idea, because there are a lot of dabblers in here, I'm sure you know who you are, who kind of jump from language to language, and I see it's very popular between the very young polyglots as well these days. They jump into the community, they get excited like I did 2 years ago. They say, I want to learn these 15, 20 languages. And the thing is, like Anthony Lauder said, the way to learn 10 languages is if you speak 9, you add 1. That's it. You learn one at a time, right? Learning more languages at the same time can actually be detrimental, which I was at the Polyglot workshops in Budapest last year, and that was one of the things that really stuck with me, that Richard Simker said, was if you learn languages that are similar at the same time, you have a lot of corruption and sort of you confuse them, and then it's detrimental to your learning. So at the same time, stick with it, because it might not seem like you're getting anywhere, but the rewards are at the end of the journey, or towards the end of beginner levels, fluency, whatever you want to call it. That's also a controversial topic. But then, again, going back to the earlier slides, is keep going. If you don't stop learning the language, you cannot fail. And I take a lot of support in that. And here's a little Itchy Feet. I'm a big fan of Itchy Feet. I don't know if Malachi is here, but don't sue me. I really like this idea that when you start learning a language, you have this very easy, you get this almost like honeymoon effect, where it's really exciting and oh my god, this is amazing. And then you kind of get to the last picture, which is like, don't look back, because this is what's ahead. It's kind of like the more you know, the more you know you don't know. So language learning gets scarier and scarier, but if you keep going and if you ignore that brain sabotage, you'll be fine. It's just you can get up Mount Fluency, no problem. It's just one step at a time. And this is kind of the same, saying it in a different way, that we shouldn't try to hurry learning a language. There are lots of, as much as I love Benny, the whole idea of learning a language in 3 months can be detrimental as well. I like the idea of making language learning more effective, doing quick bursts of language learning, but sometimes people who don't really know what that means, for instance, that Benny studied that language for 8 to 10 hours a day during those 3 months, kind of gets lost. So the people who are new to it think, oh yeah, I can learn Russian in 3 months. I tried it. I did not learn Russian in 3 months. And in fact, more than 2 years later, I still don't feel like I've learned Russian. So it can really kill your motivation if you feel like you've got absolutely nothing done in this sort of very short time frame. It's much better to be overly realistic and just really set yourself some really nice lengthy goals that you can then surprise yourself and say, oh, well, I actually did learn 1,000 words of Russian in 2 months or 3 months, whatever you want to say. I didn't expect to do that, so that way you get even more motivation. It is allowed to have fun. That's something I also learned, because when I was looking for the polyglot secret, it's always about efficiency. It's like, how can we do it faster, better, or how can we retain more vocabulary? How can we basically put vocabulary into our brains? And sometimes I didn't memorize. I tried to really just, how fast can I do it? And it felt like the Matrix, when they take that chip or whatever it is and they download the karate program or I guess they also had language programs. But at the end of the day, the activity that you will do the most is probably the one you like doing. It's kind of like saying, well, reading is efficient for language learning. Yes, but if you don't like reading at all, it'll be the biggest pain in the world. Like one of my friends, Robin, he says, I can sit with a book in a language I can barely understand, and he will go through 1 page at a time. It'll take him 15, 30 minutes. Maybe there's some in this room who do the same. And he says he can do that for 12, 15 hours. He doesn't care. But if I try to do that for 5 minutes, I'll be like, kill me already. I mean, bring me any kind of learning. So the point is, you also sometimes forget. People sometimes ask me about, should I read to learn languages? And I say, well, do you read in your native language? They're like, no, I read Harry Potter 1 10 years ago. Like, yeah, you shouldn't read then. I mean, it's great if you can get through a textbook anyway, but I would look at some audio or video methods in that sense. So sometimes we forget that. It's like, everyone's talking about Assimil. I don't know how many like Assimil here. I definitely like it. But if you don't like the idea of reading, Daniel's waving enthusiastically. If you don't like the idea of reading, then it's really a drag to do it. So you're not going to enjoy it, so you're not going to do it. And like I said before, learning a language is doing something over and over, really. And the experiment is similar to one of the earlier ones, where you have to make it yours. And that's actually a good reason or a good plug to listen to the podcast, because people are going to share how they learn. So you can get inspiration, and they very, very much, like I had Michael on from the Hyperclass, I don't know how many of you seen the movie. He said, yeah, I kind of just listen to Pimsleur. Okay, cool. And then I talked to Iversen, who's like, oh, I take the dictionary and make word lists. Okay, cool. And so you get all these ideas, and you just try them. For instance, right now I'm doing the goal list method. I'm up to about 600 words of Hungarian, and 100 in the distillation 1, if people know the technical term. So basically, I'm trying that. If I in 2 months from now say, you know what, I think it was more useful to use Anki or Memrise, then I'll go back to it. But I'm trying all the different things. And that's my point with this slide, is just try different things. Don't, just because you've tried one thing and you liked it, don't assume there aren't better methods for you out there. Be you, and that's very important, because you're the only one who can be you. But also because, like I said before, I compared myself to Benny Lewis when I started learning, because I thought, well, yeah, he said he only knew English when he started his journey. But the problem was I was comparing my beginning to somebody else's middle, and it just doesn't work like that. Benny had been learning I don't know how many languages when I first found him. So of course he'd already focused on the method. He knew what it took to get that kind of fluent level. Or, well, that's a whole different argument. But let's say he spoke some of the language at the end of the challenge. And I definitely didn't speak any Russian at the end of my challenge. So the comparison game is very dangerous. So try to avoid it at the most. Be curious is really important, and I think it is a natural trait for many people here in the room. So it's not something that I don't expect many of you will see this slide and say, oh yeah, I'll be curious when I leave the room. But it's good to somehow think about yourself sometimes. And I have a great picture that really illustrates this. I haven't actually asked Richard for permission about this, but I don't think he'll mind. And that's in Hungary. We were about to leave this apartment. And we were all ready, and then Richard saw that he was walking by, and he just kind of glanced at the bag, and he was like, and so he really wanted to know what this meant. He obviously knows some Hungarian, but he didn't get the whole meaning. So he had to sit down, find the Google Translate app, and try and work it out. And I don't know if any of you tried to use Google Translate for Hungarian, but it's practically useless, so it took some time. It's like if you look up a word in the nominative that has no ending attached, okay, you might be able to find it, but anything that's put anything to the end, you will not get much luck with, and maybe you'll use it wrong even. So it took a few minutes, and I was like, this is a perfect illustration of the curiosity. And I talked to Richard a little bit after about it, and he said, when he walks out on the street and he sees all the signs, it kills him to not know what they mean. So he is constantly thinking about it, and obviously Richard is a bit of an outlier even in this group, but it's a great concept of how important curiosity is. Does anyone have the time? Are we good?
We are 30.
Good. Thank you.
A very sentence.
What's
It was
that?
a very good sentence.
Oh yeah, if anyone was curious, it means it was a good idea or I made a good choice.
Good decision.
Oh, decision, yeah. Thank you. And this is the, if anyone's seen Anthony Lauder's great talk from the first Polyglot conference in Budapest, he talked about the concept of adding one, which eventually turned into the Add One community, not affiliated with Anthony, but his idea was basically learning a language, or learning 10 languages is basically learning 9, one at a time, and then adding the 10th. So that's a great thing to have in mind, because a lot of, and I do the same, I have a list of the languages I want to learn, but I'm not learning them at once. I'm separating them so I don't get overwhelmed. And I know some dabblers, like I mentioned before, who kind of switch between them every day and every week, and you really have to be careful with that, because if you just have some focus, like one of the earlier slides, you get it quite a lot further. But I'm sure some of you know this. Stay regular, it's also important. It's a good concept. I think that if you do 5 minutes a day, you will learn a language quite quickly, actually. But a lot of people, myself included, had this thing where I wouldn't do anything for a week or 2 weeks, and then I'd do 5 hours of Essenil or memorize or something. And yeah, it was useful, but I honestly think that the brain, or memory at least, works. You know, we have all these spaced repetition theories, and they're proven by Stephen Krashen and all these researchers back in the day, that regularity is what makes you learn things. That's how SRS work, memorize Anki. So it's a spaced repetition. So if you can, try to do a little bit more often instead of a lot less often. That was my personal lesson from that. Get help, not in a clinical way, although could be useful as well. But depends on what languages you study. Russian and Hungarian, yeah, maybe get some help. But I'm thinking, don't be alone in this. And obviously we are at a Polyglot conference, which is a perfect example of a way you can get energized. I personally know that when I come here and I see all the flags on all your badges, I get super pumped and energized to go back to language learning and really give it my all. And you can get this motivation from many places: exchanges, tutoring, accountability partners, Add One Challenge, Facebook, all over the place. Like, I'm sure some of you have, exchanged contact details, Skype numbers, and you can sort of keep each other accountable to this. And that's why I started the podcast and the website, actually. It was a way for me to force myself to be accountable. Even if it was only my mom reading my blog in the beginning, that was one person I couldn't let down, So, and then I had a few friends who said, "Oh, I like this article," and then suddenly there was a pressure on me to keep doing it. Because if you're not learning a language, it's really hard to write about learning a language. Nobody's perfect, so we shouldn't strive for perfection. And I think this is a pretty obvious point, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But basically, if you are like me and is quite introverted, going into a shop to order something, even though you are 100% sure you could conduct the thing in the foreign language, you're still like, "Oh, is it that or that?" And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you got it right or wrong, because unless you're really far in your language learning, they're going to know you're a beginner anyway. So there's no trying to be perfect. But that's, again, the brain sabotaging us. And even if you don't know what the right one is, you still try to make it right. And for languages like Russian and Hungarian, it's kind of a fool's quest to think that you can correct your own sentence in Hungarian when you've only been studying it for a few months. So perfection is really a killer of performance or practice, speaking with each other. And as an introvert, I don't know how many introverts are in the room, but this is a big one for that personality type, because you just want it to be perfect before you even start speaking anything. And the thing is, with many languages, you'll be understood anyway. So, there are quite a few languages where you can't make a simple mistake and they won't understand you at all. But so don't be perfect, or nobody's perfect, really. This is a good response to the question, or the excuse really, I don't have time to learn languages. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before if you talk to friends, or they want to say, "Oh, I'd really love to learn French, but I don't have the time. I have kids, I have a family, I have a job." And the thing is, you can ask them, well, how much TV do you watch in a week? Or when do you go to bed? When do you get up? And if you can't find 5 minutes in a day, in a normal day, then I'll bet you they can find 5 minutes. You can get up 5 minutes earlier, you can take 5 minutes in your lunch break. The idea that you completely disregard even the idea of learning a language just because of "I don't have time" is a lot more of an excuse than actual reality. And I know some people are busy, but the truth is you don't find time to learn languages or do anything really. It's an overarching theme. If you want to lose weight, you make time to go to the gym, and it's the same with languages. All right, and this one is for the dabblers, and I'm sure we all know what this means. But basically, when you're really not enjoying Russian grammar, it doesn't help to switch to Swedish grammar or Swedish verbs or whatever. You know, you have to go through it, and it's just the brain. It's just the brain being stupid, trying to say, well, can't we do something else? This is a little bit dangerous. This is a little bit difficult. Please, let's go to something else. And so constantly trying to tempt us to do something else as a form of procrastination and as a form of, well, it's basically, I think, an old survival instinct, because if something feels really hard, then the brain sends all these signals that, should we really be doing it? And I guess it was usually designed for running away from mountain tigers or something, but now we use it for Russian grammar, which I guess some people might find scary, but... and one of the final points here is share your learning. And I'd love to invite everyone in this room and everyone in the world really who are interested in language learning to come onto the podcast and talk to me about your learning story. So if you have any kind of great stories, or maybe you learned 30 languages, or you learned a language really quickly or a really unusual way, or you have a fun story to share, or I'd really love to hear from you. So I'll give you a link at the end of the presentation where you can... I'll take questions in just 1 minute or so. And what I've also been talking about during this whole talk is that all these things about how to be a better language learner actually applies to anything you want to do in life. Maybe you want to learn how to play the piano or play chess. For instance, I've just picked up chess, and there's a total science to it. You don't just play and then you get better. You know, you study, like you study in language learning. You study the openings, you study the theory, and then playing is just a form of practicing. And in fact, I could probably have had a slide about that when we talk to each other in the language, we're practicing what we already know. So it's not exactly learning to go to, let's say, a meetup or in the Alligatoreo or whatever. We're kind of enforcing what we already know. So the study time is actually what makes you learn the language. So when you sit down at your desk or your computer, you put on Memorize Anki or read a good textbook, that's the learning. The practice is speaking it, and that really only reinforces what you know. If you look at chess players, for instance, people who just play, stay at the same rating, roughly. Because they get better at pattern recognition, so they don't fall, but they don't know theory, so they don't know how to respond to different moves. And it's the same in language learning. You can have the same level in a language all the time if you only speak it. But do that little bit of grammar research, or a little bit of memorize, or Duolingo, or whatever you want to do, and you can actually improve a lot more than if you just talk all the time. And it's the same for listening, actually. If you watch TV in a foreign language, it's very useful, but you're very unlikely to learn much from it. You're more like you take in and you cement what you already know fundamentally. Because if you don't know what they're saying, it's very hard by osmosis to just get it. You can reinforce some theories, you can deduct and take from context, but the hardcore, the amount of language learning is going to come mainly from book time, the study time, tutor time as well. All right, so we finally made it to the end of the Polyglot secret. And what is the secret? Well, I have now done probably over 100 interviews with polyglots, and I can safely say there is no secret, unfortunately. We just have to put in the work. But if we use some of these mind tricks, or mind tricks almost, we can hopefully make it easier for ourselves and stop our brain from sabotaging us. So that was all I had today, so thank you so much for listening.